I do pride, my leadership teams in making more correct decisions, certainly far more than bad decisions over the last 2.5 decades. And I think that's a testament to assembling the right leadership team and listening.
I think Lincoln's a great choice. I think of the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, and I can see them in one of those boardrooms, and he's just kind of silently listening, letting them get all their air out, and then he just kind of brings them back to the vision.
Yeah. His emotional intelligence was pretty remarkable to be able to deal with those types of personalities and keep your own ego in check while you're doing it.
Hello and welcome back to the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you found the right podcast, because we interview the brightest stars from all the different corners of the pharma universe. The Pharmaverse is powered by K. Bassman International, a leader in pharma and biotech recruiting, and we're also sponsored by Executive Biotech Advisors, a trusted consulting resource in the biotech industry. We're joined today by John O'Donnell, the VP of Global HEOR at Madrigal Pharmaceuticals. Before we talk to John, I want to note that everything discussed in this podcast reflects the personal views of our guest and does not represent the views, policies, or positions of their employer. John is known as a thought leader in HEOR, but also equally regarded as a leader and manager. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing everything HEOR, with tons of leadership and hiring insights, and why John is optimistic about the future of pharma. So let's dive right in. John O'Donnell, welcome to the Pharmaverse. Well, I've just been so impressed with you over the years. Your reputation is sterling. And I know you've had some really impressive roles with really prestigious companies leading huge teams. But just tell us briefly about your role at Madrigal.
Sure, Michael. And it's great to be here at Pharmaverse. It's a real pleasure, real honor to join you. So I'm presently at Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, and this is a small biotech, but my role is a classic health economics outcomes research role. I head up a small but mighty team in a small growing biotech. So we do, Michael, a lot of the standard things that other HEOR leads do across the industry, looking at quality of life, assessing the value of our medicines, a lot of payer and health technology assessment and governmental interactions. We start to work with a product very early on in the life cycle, and obviously we'll follow a medicine all the way through to patent expiry. Now, obviously in a biotech, I think as juxtaposed to some of my other roles in large biopharma companies, you tend to cross swim lanes a little bit more, and you tend to get involved in things that perhaps, they had sub-teams in a large pharma company to deal with. For example, local patient access opportunities overseas, where the large company may have an affiliate to work on a lot of that. But in a biotech, small growing biotech, you may have to take that on yourself. So if you like that kind of thing, it's very stimulating. It's been a real honor to come to this great company. And, we're focused on improving the liver health of patients and overall at the patient outcomes level and at the societal level. So it's a really exciting space to be in. And to be an HEOR leader, it's a real privilege, Michael.
Yeah, it is an exciting time there. And, your role is global, because every time I call you, you're in some other country, or every time I get an email from you, you're like, hello from this amazing country. And, the guests that we've had on the Pharmaverse, we try to get people from all different sectors. And we've only had one other person from HEOR. But with your HEOR focus, your global perspective, what do you see as the challenges that are facing pharma right now?
Well, I know, and you've had some very esteemed colleagues on your Pharmaverse podcast, so I think they've probably covered some of the ones, and they're consistent with some of the concerns we have. Obviously, our concerns and some of the challenges relate a little bit more toward affordability. Clearly, it's something that's very much in the ether now, both in the U.S. and certainly overseas. But that's been with us for really decades in the HEOR space, demonstrating the value to society and to patients of our medicines. Affordability has always arisen, but now it's become quite acute as societies are under pressure, economies are under pressure. I'd say also, Michael, there's been a lot of very important policy changes in the recent era. We started with the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. a couple of years back. which actually brought formalized health technology assessment to the U.S. So caused us to really rethink how we're really demonstrating and assessing value in the U.S., particularly for the governmental sector, the Medicare sector. And then, more recently, MFN, which I'm sure some of your colleagues have talked a little bit about on the Pharmacast, essentially, most favored nation is really engendering very novel, very new conversations, both in the U.S., but also overseas about the pricing of medicines and differential pricing on a global basis, who carries some of the opportunity and challenges to get great medicines and healthcare into the hands of patients. So I'd say, those are, I would say, a little bit of wind in our face at times, a little bit of whitewater change for us. But like every challenge, I think it leads to some opportunities. So we at HEOR have been front and center in grappling with some of these challenges. And I think, the successful biopharmaceutical company would keep that, in mind, that health economics, outcomes research is really part of the cure for some of the challenges that face societies and face companies moving forward. Yeah.
I really like that word picture about the white cap seas kind of coming at you. And I could see a ship trying to navigate through those. And I think you're right there. Anytime there's a change, challenging times, there are opportunities for those that can see it. So what do you think the opportunities are for our industry in these choppy waters?
So I think, to your question, there is more integration. And I think a colleague said this to me once, the questions are similar. The rules of the road are different. And I think that's quite apropos.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you are an expert in this particular area, if not the expert. But I do want to dive into some leadership insights because I know you're an expert there too. Everybody that I know that's ever worked under your leadership just loved it, got a lot out of it, and would always want to work with you again. And you're such an articulate, smart grown-up. But for some people, the leadership journey actually starts in elementary school, or for others, it's in grad school. But is there a point in time when you were first given a leadership opportunity? Can you think back and picture that?
There's many very bright, capable leaders in the HEOR space. It's been a real privilege, and I've learned a lot from many of my compatriots. But it's nice to be recognized for some of the contribution that I've made at the leadership level. That question again gives me pause because you mentioned elementary school. I haven't thought about that in decades, but I was, as I recall, elected as to be president of my fifth grade class. So I was probably, 10 years old? And thinking back, some of the things I learned then, I think it did carry through a little bit. One thing was don't overpromise in any election, because ultimately you have to deliver on what you say you purport to deliver, and ultimately the roost comes back. And also, so it's very kind of common here in leadership circles to talk about storytelling in industry. You've probably heard that a bit, Michael, yourself. But it has to be authentic, and it has to be based on some of the insights that you've had, through the School of Hard Knocks, or some of the things that you've learned, and being, accessible and authentic in that. So I think maybe as early as fifth grade, I was learning that you had to be a good leader, you had to tell a bit of a story and provide a vision, and not just kind of a taskmaster or task person. That's something I learned a little bit early on. Also, again, just having an open mind and listening to your staff, your frontline staff, your leadership team. It's hard to do, but don't be the first person that speaks. And particularly when you're considering some sort of policy innovation or change or program, adaptation, or deciding on a project, I think it's very hard for somebody who's used to, basically leading a large organization to sit back and just listen to the perspectives around the table. And even in, shall I say, the rank and file, our frontline staff who are closest to the issues. So I've learned a little bit to sit back and listen, and to as my parents did, just listen to opinions and appreciate them, and make sure that people feel that they've been listened to. So yeah, some lessons learned kind of early on, I suppose, that have carried with me a little bit into my professional life.
Oh, great. Yeah, those are great advice. That's great advice. And they're consistent with other leaders. Be a good listener. Be a good storyteller to paint the vision of where you're trying to take things. And it's also a really key thing to have in HEOR. Really, it's telling a story. It's painting a picture at the end there. So I could see how
Yes.
all those
Yeah.
experiences make John O'Donnell John O'Donnell.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I mean, if I think about even a small biotech, we probably have 70 or 80 projects underway. And if I want to assess the value of a medicine or portray that, or an intervention of any kind, really, and I try to present 70 different studies or even 10 different studies, you just see the eyes glaze over and confusion ensue. So even there, I think it's a great point, Michael. You have to sew together a story, a verifiable evidence-based story, but something that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and gives the decision maker some context for the decision they're making and the evidence gaps and opportunities that they have. So I think that's a really good insight when it comes to even demonstrating or assessing the value of interventions, for sure.
And now that I know you a little bit better, and I love words. I have a master's in English. I love words. Your vocabulary is just different than everybody else. And it makes a lot of sense that maybe, your dad was a lawyer or your parents were lawyers or whatever. It makes a lot of sense because they use words that I don't even know what they're talking about.
Yes, yep.
But aside from your dad as a lawyer, was there any other leadership influences before you even got into industry?
Yeah, I think, well, I'd have to say that that's the way my dad spoke with us. And so it kind of, at times, it's been at times a detriment in industry, because sometimes my colleagues would just say, hey, can you just don't use $100 word here. Can you just spell it out? So it's something that I actually monitor at times, but it sounds like a bit unsuccessfully. But in terms of, other kind of analogs for leadership, I have to say I have been a study. I'm kind of a deep reader and reader of history. So maybe a little bit less lately because we're launching on a global basis. So I'm reading a lot of our science-based work rather than, history and great leaders. But I have made a study and just watching great leaders who I've admired in my career. I would say, historically, not surprisingly, Lincoln comes to mind. I really valued the book by, I think, Doris Kearns Goodwin, A Team of Rivals, and the leadership style of Lincoln. So instead of picking people who just would support him and, in effect, being, yes men and women, I guess at that time it was yes men, he really picked, in effect, a team of rivals. These were individuals who were bright, capable leaders. They were highly opinionated. In fact, some of them, I think, Seward and Chase, they wanted to be president. But he wasn't afraid. He was confident enough to pick people to be part of his cabinet. It was one of the most extraordinary cabinets in history. And leading, talk about whitewater change in a turbulent time, through the Civil War. So one of the more remarkable cabinets in history. And he picked, people who were tough to get along with, a leadership team that was very opinionated, wasn't afraid to speak up, in fact, vied for his position. And I always kind of admired that and thought about that from a leadership perspective. And how do you cultivate that at the leadership team? If you're the first to speak, if you're dictatorial, if it's hierarchical, how are you ever going to get that feedback that you really need to recalibrate, to make the right decisions? And so, I've really tried to cultivate that either consciously or unconsciously at my leadership team levels that I've been a privilege to form. It, essentially bringing people around you who could debate you. And if you're willing to listen, help you change course. And it's not just the senior people in your organization. You have to get out and talk to people who are working in the front lines and really try to understand what they're grappling with, what the true issue is. And if you've got an organization where you've got yes people around you, and I've seen it happen, and it can happen to myself if I let it happen, you're going to make weak decisions and probably errant decisions as a leader. And so I think that team of rivals, there can be a bit extreme if you let it, but, allowing that, if you will, kind of cacophony of voices, and then ultimately you have to make the call, but at least you've listened and you've done some really collection of input that can hold you in good stead as you move forward. And I do pride, my leadership teams in making more correct decisions certainly far more than bad decisions over the last 2.5 decades. And I think that's a testament to assembling the right leadership team and listening.
It is. It is. Now, what about in industry? Who's been sort of your biggest leadership influence in industry?
Yeah, I've had the luxury, really the privilege of working with some great people in industry, super smart, very giving. I can think of a number. When I was doing my doctoral program, I had to finish my dissertation while I had just started in industry, and just having the protected time to do that because somebody, placed a bet on me that I would give value back to the organization. So I've had the privilege of working with some great people, some very selfless, leaders and managers, really probably too many to name. I think one thing that stuck with me from one of my mentors early on, and this kind of led into kind of the science-based approach that I have a bit and foster in my organizations, is he pointed to, we were in a therapeutic area that was still an evolving therapeutic area, like, in fact, many. And he had authored a major text, a 6-inch book that sits on your table. So really an esteemed leader in his space. And he said, John, if you look at that text there, half of that is not evidence-based. And for this really esteemed leader in this therapeutic area, distinguished leader, to make that observation about his own text, and also just point out that, in fact, that's fairly endemic in healthcare, that much of what we undertake is really not evidence-based. Everything from the way we organize healthcare to some of the interventions that we bring forward was a real eye-opener for me as a junior investigator, a junior member of a biopharmaceutical company. And I've carried that with me a bit. Is this really evidence-based? Are we really talking about evidence here, or is this conjecture? I think a leader's real challenge is separating appearance from reality. I think that's the human condition. And it can be really hard, as a leader. What's reality here, and what is conjecture, and getting to the bottom of things. And so just recognizing that, we don't know everything. And that textbook is only half evidence-based. It's something I think back on a lot from a great leader that I had the experience to work with. But Michael, there have been many, and I've been really privileged, in that respect.
And if I was to interview 100 other people, your name may come up, or and you've impacted a lot of people there too, and that's true. I mean, we get so stuck in our own reality and our own version of truth that sometimes we think that is evidence-based because we think it.
Yeah. We often, as I thought about it, and I caution sometimes my teams, don't fall in love with your product. Don't fall in love with your medicine. In a way, what we work on is a bit like animal husbandry, if you will. If you're not, I suppose, a vegetarian, but it's we have to be looking at our medicines as our customers see them, and try to separate, our aspirations for our medicines from what is really the evidence. And I think that's really important, especially in our field of health economics, outcomes research. Falling in love with your product. We all feel really strongly about getting our medicines into the hands of patients, but we have to know, where they have strengths and where they have limitations, and help underscore that.
Well, I know you've spent so much time in health economics, outcomes research. It's so data-driven as a subsector of industry. Has it having to be so data-driven, has that shaped your leadership style? Like, is it like show me the proof kind of a leadership style?
A bit. I would say a bit. I would say back to the softer skills we talked about. I think that's probably a bit more of a hallmark of my leadership style. I don't necessarily say, show me the data before we make a decision on everything. So I think a little bit of that emotional intelligence is probably, I would value a little bit higher than just, purely show me the data. Now, that said, an element of being in a scientific company, having a scientific credentialing, and I think anybody that, if you interview who's been on my team, will know that I hold high scientific standards, and I don't feel that we need to relax those standards. I heard very early on when I entered into industry, well, John, your customer, be it a healthcare practitioner or governmental entity, these methods are so advanced, they won't understand them. I think you should use a simpler method. And often that meant possibly even an incorrect method or not a scientifically robust method. And I always rebelled against that. If we can't communicate an advanced scientific method, then that's our bad. We shouldn't shy away from using the right method just simply because it's hard to explain. We have to find ways to explain it. So that theme, though, Michael, I think that pervades a little bit more of my leadership style: ethics, scientific rigor. I don't let anything go out of my organization, and my staff and colleagues, they're attuned to this, so I don't see it. We are a very rigorous, ethical shop wherever I've worked. And I think, the cultures and the companies that I've worked have fostered that as well. But I think holding staff from, disclosures to publications to many of our manuscripts to a high standard that is this accurate? Is what we're stating rigorous, appropriate, defensible by the data? So I think that fosters a little bit of a leadership team culture that permeates your organization. And I think it ultimately holds you in good stead, and you avoid, challenging ethical or scientific issues by right from the front, establishing that focus on rigor and ethics.
That's great. One of the other things I really respect about you is you have this knack for attracting and identifying top talent.
Right.
What is a hiring tip that you can share with the leaders that are listening? Because hiring is very difficult.
Yeah. Well, you've helped a bit with that, Michael. You've brought some good talent to us over the years, so I really appreciate that. And I can't underappreciate, the actual help that it takes to bring good talent in front of you. I think, it's a whole constellation of opportunities and ways of looking at the world in terms of finding talent. I think a little bit, since we're talking a little bit about in a historical realm here, if I think about, Lewis and Clark, when they first were assembling the core of discovery, they were looking for, the top elite individuals who were battle hardened and could get out there and survive in the wilderness. So I think, in a way, I often think about the first few hires in a new organization I'm building as we speak now, for example, that some of that initial talent as you attract builds on itself. Those individuals, if they're respected in industry, if they in turn, you can attract them and get them aboard, they in turn, expand your network, and they bring great people with them. So there's this bit of this notion, I think, of, get it right to begin with, find the right talent to begin with, and it tends to build on itself. These, staff talk to each other. They have colleagues across the industry. It's a small world. It's a small industry in some respects. And they will tell each other, look, I really like this leadership team. Our pay package or, our promotions aren't as frequent as company X or company Y, but that's not necessarily what lures great talent to an organization. They want to be appreciated. They want to be in a place that sure is hardworking, but there's also fun and a sense of enjoyment. We're spending a lot of time at work. So I like to say that, I work hard, but I also like to play hard when it's appropriate. I don't think my staff right now would think there's much play going on since we're launching on a global basis, but staff talk to each other. And so I think that kind of core discovery concept starts to build. So having a really high standard, particularly as you're building out your organization, tends to kind of snowball. And hopefully if you've developed a culture of hard work but fun and recognition, people want to come regardless of things like pay packages or location. And people will not stay with you if you're not cultivating that kind of culture within the organization. So those are, probably going on a little bit long-winded about that. I would say the other thing I've learned to my detriment a bit is your antenna can be quite accurate. We go through formal interview protocols. We interview individuals. Bear with me a second. I just lost it. We have panel interviews, but I've learned over time that those little red flags, when I've ignored them, they always come back almost invariably. Now, someone can have a difficult day at an interview. I think that's just one data point. So I'm not talking about that. But I would encourage my leadership colleagues maybe just getting into this business of hiring teams and building out. Your antenna, you probably got to this leadership role for a reason, and your antenna can be accurate. And I would listen to those red flags on occasion. When I've ignored them, it's been to my detriment almost every time. So it's a bit of those bigger picture, maybe cultural issues, but don't forget your gut, I think, as well.
Is so true. And, I have a saying with, I do a lot of hiring with another colleague of mine here at K. Bassman, and our mantra is, if it's not an immediate yes, it's a no. Because what yes feels like, what yes looks like, and it's, yes, and if it's like, maybe, usually doesn't end up working out. I have time. We have time for two more questions, and I want to circle back to HEOR. I'm dying to know how AI is impacting HEOR. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've had the privilege to, I think one of the aspects of leadership style we probably haven't touched on is just, can you just simply unleash your staff, if I can use that term? Just give them the slack time for really talented staff to excel and to get into areas that might be novel for your organization. And in my previous lives, I've had that opportunity, a little bit of time with some very bright individuals to say, you know what, these are fantastic ideas. Honestly, I am not an expert in this space, and I am absolutely willing to back you to think some of this work through. So accordingly, I think I've had the opportunity in a couple of situations in HEOR to have some very bright people thinking pretty deeply about applications in AI and then bringing that to fruition pretty quickly. So there's some obvious areas, and it's going to transform, the whole pharmaceutical industry, but definitely HEOR as a microcosm of that. We do a lot of economic modeling, and I think, fast forward 10 years, maybe it's 5 years, am I going to need an economic modeling team to do the 10, 15, 20 models or adaptations of models that I have to do, across countries on a global basis? I think AI can take a lot of that over. And so we've pilot tested that and actually brought it to fruition. So economic modeling is one area. Another area where I'm sure any of my compatriots listening to this, systematic literature reviews, we do a lot of those, and that absolutely can and is being automated. Obviously, more broadly than HEOR, I think, target identification, clinical trial design, which, we interact with a great deal in terms of our input. That fair amount of that work is going to be, AI driven in the future. So it really will transform the way we work. Now, what I've noticed is the challenge, the technical aspects, LLM, large language models, in a lot of respects, we know about hallucination. They're not quite there yet. If you work a lot with AI, which I have been increasingly now, and you're taken aback at some time where you think you have a trusted answer, then you find out that, I really should have thought that through a little bit more. So I think, the human in the mix is going to be very critical for years to come. And moving AI into the business process itself, the work process and the workflow is not simple. So let's say we almost perfect an economic modeling capability in AI, incorporating that in the actual work process of, I'm starting the work, I'm commissioning it, I'm actually maturing it, and then I'm using this model, if you will, in live fire exercise. That's almost as much a challenge as the technical aspects of AI, I'm coming to realize. But it's going to transform HEOR. A current use case, just brand new, and something we're grappling with, is essentially taking rapid response activity we have underway with a major payer authority overseas, basically loading all the respective submission documents, clinical trial documentation in a compliant way aboard AI, so that in literally the 2 weeks you get to respond to a very complex set of questions, we're going to be able to query AI to help in terms of how do you synthesize these questions, what might be the available data to respond to these questions. And obviously there'll be many humans in the thick of things here, so it'll be more of an aid to us. But that's just one of several use cases that we'll see. And I think, again, it'll pervade, everything we're doing, not unlike computers did when I started out way back, decades ago in health services research.
It'll be interesting to see where this whole AI thing goes, especially with HEOR and a lot of different divisions within every division within a pharmaceutical company. But I hate to say it, but we're out of time for today's episode. But I learned so much about HEOR and about leadership, and I know our audience is appreciative for you sharing these insights and words of wisdom with us. We've all benefited. So thank you, John, for sharing your time with us.
It's been a real pleasure, Michael. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for the time.
That concludes another episode of the Pharmaverse Podcast. We have many more great leaders lined up for you, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single career-enhancing insight. As for this episode, that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse Podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.